Our speaker, Marcia Rhode. She is a personal coach and business consultant. Her topic today is going to be coaching skills for job seekers. Marcia Rhode is a personal coach, business consultant who helps individuals and organizations uncover and refocus their capabilities to achieve success. She spent 3 decades in business and IT, where she architected business and IT solutions and managed numerous teams and organizations, from small organizations to Fortune 500 companies. She went on to become a certified evidence-based coach with an MA in organizational development. Now she helps others architect practical solutions to their current challenges and dilemmas. We all need that. She came to understand how tech and business problems and personal challenges are fundamentally rooted in human dynamics more than situational circumstances. She is passionate about applying what she's learned about tech, teams, trauma, and transformation to help others navigate both change and something that none of you suffer from, inertia. Let's give a warm welcome to Marcia Rhode.
It's so nice to see so many people here, and I'm really pleased to be able to share a topic that is very important to me, and I think it's important to all of us in so many ways. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about coaching skills, and particularly I'm going to be talking about the communication skills that are part of what we call coaching skills. Let me find mine here. So I've been around for a long time, as you heard. I've been on a lot of different projects. I've worked for a lot of different kind of companies, large and small. I've participated in quite a few projects, like I said. And what I learned along the way is that most projects, I would say, most projects fail in one way or another. Now, there are abject failures. There's a few just really failed. There's fewer still that we can say unadulterated success. And then everything else kind of falls in the middle, which is you might get it done at some point, but it didn't meet your project schedule, it didn't meet your budget, and it didn't meet your time frame. And so to blame generally is communication, lack of communication among the teams or across the teams or with the vendors and so forth. So so anyway, that's I find to be really important, and learning how to communicate better. And so this presentation will talk in more detail about what that means. So I don't think anything will be brand new concepts, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to take away something that can help you in a job search. So anyway, back to my projects. So not all my projects fail, but you know, there's a lot of frustration when you're on a project, you're putting your heart into it and it isn't working. So I ended my consulting career and got my master's in organizational development in the hopes that it would help me work better on teams. And it did. And so today I want to share with you some of the things I've learned. I guess the short answer of what I've learned is the only person you change is yourself. And when you change, everybody around you changes. And so at the heart of how we communicate with others or how we interact is how we communicate. So anyway, I got my master's in organizational development, and along the way, I got my coaching certification. And I hadn't planned to do that, but I ended up doing it because I found out coaching was the answer I was looking for to help my teams. So first, a little bit about coaching. I want to define the terms because some of you are aware of what it is and maybe some not so much. A coach is a partner with you to help you meet your goals. And sometimes it helps to describe it in a way of what it isn't. So it's not a mentoring, because mentoring is helping somebody somebody helps you in your field to grow and flourish. Therapy is about looking back and dealing with problems and the whys of it. We're not that. Consulting is being paid to give somebody an answer, which is what I did, but that's not coaching. An athletic coach is a coach that helps focus on weaknesses to help you get better. But a coach, as I'm talking about it, which can sometimes be called executive coach, life coach, it's just coaching. A coach is focused on your goals. It's like your own advocate, a partnership with you to meet whatever goals you want to meet. And one of the things that happens is when you're doing a coaching event, or not event, but doing a coaching process, one of the things you learn is the possibilities, and you learn new things about yourself that you can take advantage of. And in doing that, and this is a definition I like, the coaching facilitates self-directed neuroplasty. And what that means is your brain changes as you start to think in positive ways, as you start getting more goal-oriented and making steps towards that. It actually changes your neurochemistry. So, any thoughts or questions about that? Any? Okay. So why do we talk about coaching and who cares? Well, I'm not going to read this to you, but the reason businesses pay for coaches is because it improves their bottom line. It saves them money. Because what coaching will do is teaching people how to communicate, how to better work together. And what I liked is training alone gives you a 22% increase, but when you combine training with coaching, that goes up to 88%. And so this is just a sampling of the kind of some of the cost benefit, the ROIs that we see with coaching. So, today's agenda. First, I'm going to talk about what I call workplace challenges, which I know you're trying to get into a workplace, many of you, but these are the same, it's sort of the same kind of ideas and questions that you need to think about. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then what you see in blue are what we call coaching competencies. So when you become a coach, you learn there are 11 core competencies. So I picked out 4 that I thought related best to communication and to the workplace and so forth. So I kind of grouped on the meta skills for the 21st century, and then which is trust and awareness, and then direct communication skills, and that would be active listening and relevant questions. And a point about this also is that they do not, it's not first do this, then do this, then do this. It's not, it's systemic, I guess you might say. So it's not sequential. So when I talk about one thing, it might touch on some of the other topics, which would make sense. Okay. So when we talk about workplace challenges, and this is true whether you're looking for a job, whether you're looking for a job or you're in one, is that more and more we have multicultural teams. We have virtual teams that are geographically dispersed. You may work on a project with someone you've never met. You've just talked to them on the phone and they're in another country. So that's a challenge for communication. We also, in relationships in our organizations, are getting more flat. So even at that, we know we have managers, there's people in other organizations, other companies that we deal with, and vendors. So we're always communicating. We're not just communicating with 1 or 2 people at our level. And so therefore you need to calibrate for who are you talking to and how are they going to perceive what you're saying. And then of course change and ambiguity, which is, I don't know that I need to explain that too much, but everything's always changing. Our jobs change, what's expected of us has changed, and sometimes they don't tell us. It just changed. And I threw in here the power index differences. I don't know if anybody, power distance index, if anybody's familiar with that. But what this is a man, a Dutch psychologist, I believe he was, Gerrit Hofstede, did a whole lot of work on cultural differences across countries. So there's a whole list of, so he went and they rated countries based on how they essentially view authority. So, for example, a high power index country has a lot of respect for authority, and everybody else just knows how to do that. They know they're in a subordinate role and might even be okay with that. On the other hand, a low power index are people who don't mind challenging authority. People have a lot more fluid idea about that. And hold on, I'm going to grab my note. I wrote down, just for fun, some of the power index codes for a couple of places. The US has a power index of 40, which is pretty low. And Sweden is about 35, really low. You talk about China, it's 80.
So a low power index
means you challenge authority, yeah. So Saudi Arabia is, I believe, the highest at 95. So nobody questions anybody over there. There, you just do what you say. Yeah. Let me think. India, which for a lot of technical folks, we work with a lot of Indians. 77. So they're higher. So the lower ones, like the UK, Canada's 39, I think the UK is 35, US is 40.
So you mix like a lot of the Indian culture is mixed now with the US, especially in technology. That's mixed.
Exactly. Yes, and so the reason I think that's important is because that's a factor, not just, oh, you know, they're from another culture and the kind of foods they like and so forth. You need to understand how they are viewing the transaction, the interaction. And one story I have about that, personal story, as an analyst and developer, well, working with developers, I had created a specification document that was going to move data from one little system into an integrated database. And it was pretty gnarly, but great. I got it done. I was assigned a young woman from another country. She had just kind of gotten to the US, and she's very bright. We went over the mapping, the specification document. She said she understood, and I said, please come and tell me if you have any questions. I'm right here all the time. And a few days went by, and I hadn't heard, and I thought, well, that's the only thing she's working on, and how could she not have questions? Well, I didn't want to go breathe down her neck, because I thought, well, I need to give her that autonomy to do how she does it. But I ended up, I got a little nervous about after the third day, and I dropped by her desk and said, well, you know, how's it going? What's going on? Well, she had it done, and it was totally wrong. So we lost 3 days of consulting time. So that's kind of how, and what I didn't understand is that she viewed me as an authority figure. And she viewed me as somebody that, you know, if I needed to know something, I'd come to her. She was not used to speaking up. So again, so those are subtle ways that this kind of thing can impact your communications with other cultures. Let's see. So communication challenges. So I cannot take credit for this graphic. I know others may have seen it, but I couldn't find it, but I've used it anyway. What this says to me is what I think this area, let me see if I can use the pointer, this little area here, is kind of the totality of everything you're thinking. You know, what your thoughts, your feelings, you know, it can be nonverbal. What you can put into words is what are you taking from what are you thinking and forming in your mind the words you're going to use. And then there's actually what you say. And then right here is what people really hear. And so the challenge is what you're trying to say getting across? And a lot of times it isn't. These communication challenges are the #1 reasons projects fail. They are behind most team tensions. And this is part of it, 65, and some people say as high as 90% of our communication is nonverbal. So people are reading your, pardon me, please.
My mom actually had a sign up, you know, poster that said, I know you think you understand what you thought you heard, but I'm not sure you realized that what you heard was not
What I meant. Exactly. Yeah. And that is hard, and it takes a little work and investment of our own mental energy to try to make sure we're understood. And of course, we talked about, so anyway, the nonverbal is, you know, how you're feeling, whether it's about them or not, people read that. Then there's our individual filters, how we personally, plus our cultural filters, as we talked about, that they all add up to big challenges in trying to communicate, especially on engineering projects, which is basically what software development is. Okay, let's see how I faded in here. Okay, meta skills. So when I read about successful business people like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and you ask them, What are your criteria for hiring people? You know, what makes a good candidate? Then, besides it being intelligent, they want that. The number one answer is, can I trust you? And also, and that alone, but then self-awareness kind of goes with this, because the more aware you are of how you are, and we'll talk about that, and how you feel, and how you're coming across, the more effective you're going to be as a communicator. The other skills that I'm really not going to talk about much is flexibility, such as when you're listening to someone, can you adjust to what they're saying? How flexible are you in responding? And collaboration. And collaboration requires that you at least have, that you have a good relationship with your team, that they feel that they're being heard, that you are part of their team. And this is becoming more and more the norm, is that communication skills are really more important than your technical skills. You can be the best technician, but if you don't know how to communicate and people aren't really hearing what you're trying to say, it's not going to go anywhere. So communication is a skill, and it's just as important as your technical skills. Okay, now a little bit about building trust. I mean, some of this seems obvious, but I want to talk maybe first about the graphic on the side. This, I pulled it from a book by Stephen R. Covey, who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. This was a book he wrote later. It's called The Third Alternative. And this is really about communication. And the graphic he's saying is, you see yourself, I see you, we've got two different people. When we come together and talk, we can be talking about a topic, we can exchange some information, but it's more like a debate, or who's right, who's wrong, whose idea we're going to go with. And what we really want to get to is synergy, where we hear each other, we've understood what we meant, and we take that and go, yes, and where could that be? So you kind of take away your ownership of your idea. So, and this is part of what Covey talks about as helping build trust. So, number one way to build trust is to do what you say you're going to do. I know that seems obvious, but it's surprising how many people say they'll be at a meeting at 10 o'clock and they don't. They show up at 10:15 or maybe not at all. Well, that lowers trust in you. Being congruent, which is your actions match your words, that you're consistent and congruent, and those things are kind of similar in a lot of ways, but that people know what to expect from you, that you're kind of the same, you treat people the same. Another key component in building trust is asking for and giving feedback, because feedback tells people that they heard you, they heard you, and that they feel like you understood them. And this, in turn, helps build trust. And really, one of the most important things is showing kindness and empathy. In my coaching school, I learned this term called unconditional positive regard. Because let's face it, we don't always like all the people we're working with. And that can come across. But if you take the attitude as you don't have to like everything about somebody, you just have to have honest regard for them as another human being, and you listen to them as though that mattered. So you give them that courtesy. And that's kindness and empathy, where you're paying attention and trying to let the other person know that you're on the same page with them. Okay, components of self-awareness. I called it this. It's a little acronym in the end, but what are your desires? And again, when you're looking for a job, what are advice to job seekers? Knowing what you want comes up right at the top. And what that means is, this isn't navel-gazing. It's, what do I want? Do I want, a 9-to-5 job? Do I want to have a part-time job? Do I want my hours to be like this? Whatever it is, clarify in your mind what it is you're looking for. in who you are and what you want. The second thing is your abilities, taking stock inventory of what are your skills. What is it you know how to do? What are you good at? Temperament, and I call it what is your personal syntax, which means are you a loner? Do you like to work with other people in the room? Is it, like my husband, he likes to take a problem and go work on it and come back with the answer. I, on the other hand, get a problem and want to talk to people about it to get the answer. So just understanding how you're different and realizing not everybody is like you. And then your assets, and that's kind of what I think of your special sauce. How does all of this add up together to make you unique? And this is pre-work you need to do before you go on an interview, because the clearer you are about this, it comes across to the people that you're talking to. Oh, this was from a book called Smart Work. So I like in the end, it means data. Data about yourself. Okay, the case for self-awareness. Well, obviously improved relationships, because when you have better self-awareness, you're able to read the mindsets of others. I call it embarrassment insurance, because when we don't listen, we often misunderstand what somebody is telling us, and then we can go off kind of with the wrong information. We can come across as arrogant or not listening. So all of these things lower trust and make people not really want to talk with you. So the more aware you are, obviously, you're going to be better equipped to avoid these kind of embarrassments. And when you read about leadership, they're saying that self-awareness has a more positive impact than an MBA on leadership skills. And that kind of makes sense, because leadership is about leading people, and being aware of yourself and how you come across is just as important as how everybody does. And then there's this quote, teams with high awareness make better decisions, interact better, manage tensions more effectively. And that's really what, yes?
The interview question of what is your greatest weakness, or one of those things, it used to be years ago that they said you should choose a weakness that in the workplace is a strength. So people would say, oh, I'm a workaholic, or all those stupid things that well, they're so contrived, they're so artificial. And then now they say what employers want to hear is, are you authentic? Can I trust you to really tell me this is an area that I need to work on? And so it shows that you are aware of your strengths and your challenges, and that they can trust you to be honest with them, even and authentic about your own self-awareness and self.
Right, and the more, like I said, the more clear you are with yourself, the easier it's going to be to answer these questions or to respond to an interview. Okay, so this is just a segue slide. We're going to move on to listening. Okay, there are 4 levels of listening, and this is from a guy named Otto Schwarmer, who did a lot of studies on listening, which you wouldn't think there'd be that much, but seriously, there are. The 4 levels of listening are, the first one is what we call downloading, which is being on autopilot. It's barely there, and you're operating from your current, what's going on in my world. You're not really thinking about anybody else, but you might be hearing some words here and there. The second level is a little better. It's fact-based, but this is like debating. You're not really connecting with someone, but you are more trying to compete, it's about what we call the current it situation. Does that make sense? Fact-based. The third is being empathetic. So you're asking questions and you're showing people that you're listening, and you're saying, I am paying attention to you. I hear you. The last one is it's empathetic, but it takes it a step beyond, where you were not thinking, where you were working together on a bigger issue. So it's kind of what we call the meta position, where you've gone beyond debate, and now you're looking into where can we synergize? How can we do this together? Does that kind of make sense? Let's see if there's any other points that I wanted to make on that. So back to here. So let's talk about elements of listening. Well, first of all, careful observation. So that means paying attention to the body language, what's going on in the room, what that person's stature is or status, what it is you want from them and they want from you, just being aware of the whole conversation. Thoughtful reframing. Now that says, I heard what you said, and is this right? So you're basically, you're trying to make sure that you got what they meant. And not just so when you reframe it and say it back and say something like, did I get that right? That gives them an opportunity to say, well, not quite like that. But anyway, you've got the dialogue there. And the relevant feedback goes to that, where you're saying, is this what I heard you say? Or that sounds like whatever. But in any case, the idea is to let people know you're listening. And of course, you have to be listening to let them know you're listening. Sometimes that can be hard. And when you, so when you do reframing, I call it thoughtful reframing, you're reflecting back. And that then helps solidify your understanding, your mutual understanding. So this is where we want to go. We want what we're saying to be understood for what we meant. And so it's often, it's on both sides. I hear something different than what you said, and so I'm going to react to that. So finding ways through our listening and asking for feedback and giving feedback helps us get to this sort of the place we all want to be. And I also, I'll probably get to that in a minute. So how do you know if somebody's listening? And how do you know if you're listening? You're fully present. People are reacting to you in real time. You know that they're hearing you because by their questions and their eye contact. And I don't mean staring eye contact. I mean, if you look at somebody, if you're looking in somebody's direction, you don't have to look them in the eye. You can just look around and they will think you're looking at them. But it's just a way to kind of, stay engaged. Showing empathy. Asking questions. So if that is going on, you've got a pretty good idea people are listening to you. And that you are listening. And not so much. When somebody's checking their email when you're talking to them, and I, as an analyst, a business analyst, had often to go into people's offices I didn't know, and sometimes they didn't want to tell me anything, or they were busy, or they didn't think it was important. And I can always tell because they're looking at their screen while they're nodding at me. I know they're not hearing me. The body language, again, looking away, turning this way, getting, kind of lost somewhere else. Rote replies. Yeah, oh yeah, I hear you. Yeah, okay. Multitasking. I'm working, you can hear people sometimes when you're doing a conference call and you can hear the keyboard tapping. And that's a sign they're not really listening. I mean, they're probably on level 1 or level 2, but they're not really listening to see how can we grow and generate into something bigger. And nobody asked questions. It means they weren't listening. Anybody have a comment about that or experience to share? Yeah. Well, it could be. In some cases, you're exactly right. But then I say, put it on mute, because it's distracting. And people don't really know, like, well, maybe you're doing something else.
So maybe you should explain.
Yeah, right. I'm taking notes, right. And so that goes back to just that relevant feedback, just being engaged with the persons you're talking to. Okay. This is a slide I found. I didn't make it, but I thought it was a good graphic because this is called active listening. But you notice that it gets into using questions, just avoiding prejudice, which is being that unconditional positive regard. You know, you just take it for what you see. Showing interest, summarizing what you heard, listening for feelings. You know, sometimes there was a woman I knew who was a teacher, and she had come to work and she had had a really rough night, but nobody knew that. So somebody sees her and they say, well, I'm staying away from you today. You look like you're upset. And well, she was, because she'd been up all night with her son with an asthma attack. So she was a real wreck that day, but it was not because she was mad at anybody. So kind of checking in and not making assumptions about that. Yeah.
Back to the, not so much. What if you're on a team where, whenever somebody's presenting and everybody on the team is doing that? How do you manage that as a coach?
Well, first we start out the meeting saying phones get put away. Remote team. Same thing. And no, you really can't. I mean, it's really hard on the phone to tell if somebody's listening, but some things you can say are, did I get that right? You kind of try to get them to either own, maybe they were listening, or, so you do it with questions.
Well, because I used to be on a team where we have once a month or once every other week, a consultant come in and present stuff to us that was helpful for what we did. Mm-hmm. And at the end, when there were questions, it's like they'd go around the horn, and I was the only one with questions, and I'd wait till everybody else did their thing, but it just kind of seems a little disrespectful not to have a comment or ask questions on anything.
It is, and that is one of the challenges, because we don't have control over anybody else but ourselves. And so, and it kind of depends on who you're talking to and for what reason, but there are ways to say, does everybody get that? Could you tell me what you got out of this today? As a way of not shaming them, but trying to make sure they're engaged. And, maybe they're not, and that's just how that is. Okay. Active listening. So we clarify, we summarize, we show interest. And that's the thing about people, when you're talking with them, if they don't trust you or they don't think you're listening, they're not going to tell you much. Okay, questions. And I thought I had a different thing here. So questions. Even babies who cannot speak a language can sense a feeling. They can sense all kinds of information about you, even if they don't have language. So good questions have a lot to do with your mood, how you're coming across. Is it angry? Your tone, your body language, even the word really. You can say, really? Tell me more. Or you can go, really? Huh? So which one? Which one shows you that somebody's engaged and cares and is interested in what you're saying? So trying to keep the body language and certainly your tone, and sometimes we have a tone that we don't realize is coming across the way it is. I'm one of them. So just being aware. And you can also tell when you're talking to someone, you can kind of tell by their interpersonal, their nonverbal language, whether they're not really that into it or so forth. Good questions are simple and open-ended. And that does not mean you never ask a closed-ended question, which means yes or no, black or white, up or down. But you want to get people to express and to share what they have and not just rotely answer your questions. So it's things like, well, what do you think about that? How would you do that? And being curious. Again, another way is, I'm curious about that. How do you do that? For example, I'm talking to somebody that says, we get this report every week. And, well, what do you do with that report? Is it only once a week? So that's a closed question. But, it's a way to, to show curiosity so people will be more willing to share information. And thoughtful and appropriate rephrasing, which we talked about earlier a little bit, which is letting people know you heard them. I heard you say this, is that correct? Generative is, and tell me more. You told me this, can you say more about it? So those are kind of the components of a good question. This is one for the tech people. These are Cartesian questions. And this is the way Cartesian, which is, it's a way that you're covering all your bases. So for analyst types, this would be important, which is what happens if you do something? What happens if you don't do it? What won't happen if you do? What won't happen if you don't? So, it doesn't necessarily mean do, but it's looking at things from all these directions can help you make sure you've gotten your answer covered. I have a friend from Europe who I was showing this to. She's French, and she looked at that and she said, "This is exactly how the French think." We don't do that over here. Anyway. Tips for asking questions. Avoid making assumptions. Again, clarify, did I get that right?
Question about the preceding one. So for example, if your company wants to have a policy change, or they want to diversify product line or whatever, so then before you do that, this is like modeling.
Right.
So what's going to happen if we don't do this?
Right. It's really helpful in planning.
And so then you're supposed to perhaps rely on data or data modeling in order to give you that direction?
Well, it doesn't. It depends. It depends on the situation. So if I'm a data analyst working on we're going to build some software, and my job is to go find out, talk to the database people. What do we have? What do we think it means? Go to the business who have skin in the game and talk to them. But then you come back and you say, okay, well, here's a solution that we think could work. What happens if we do that? What are the outcomes there? What happens if we don't do it and we stay like we are? And if you don't make this change, you don't do this, what will happen? And if it won't happen, and what won't happen if you don't? So it's just kind of really looking at the same thing from these different angles to and it's to flesh out questions. And you might come out of this saying, well, I don't know, we need to go talk to some more people. Or, wait a minute, this doesn't sound like a good idea as we thought. So this is just kind of things to keep in mind, especially when you're doing any kind of research or analytical work.
We had similar questions at a company I was at for budget justification. They would ask that, what happens if you get the budget, what happens if you don't?
What won't happen, yeah. So it's really kind of a concise way to kind of cover all the bases. Okay, asking good questions. We don't make assumptions. We ask for clarification. As we talked about earlier, we reframe, which is, I heard what you said, and I'm going to put it in my words and say it back to you and ask for clarification. Being concise, and I have a problem with this because I'm a free associative thinker and I can be unconcise. I know what I want to say, but thinking about what you want to say before you start talking would be good. Stat questions, where you ask 2 or 3 questions in a row before somebody can answer you. You're not getting the answer you want. And I say avoid closed questions. I would just say use them carefully because it's easy to say yes, no, when you're just asking those kind of questions, and there may be more information if you dig a little deeper. Like, tell me more. The other, matching your client's tone and language. And this just, I don't know if you guys know about neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, but it's really just becoming in rapport with someone. And really listen for what they're saying. Are they saying things like, well, this always happens, or never, or this is the only way? That's giving you insight into how they're looking at things. And when I say note it, it just is good information for you and how you're going to respond to that person. Yes?
Can you elaborate on what you mean by avoiding stacked questions?
Well, let me think. Yes. Are you going to go to the prom? The prom. Sorry, think about my nieces. Are you going to go, and what dress are you going to wear, and when are you leaving? If you ask those kind of in a row, which question are they going to answer?
Oh, you mean multiple questions?
Multiple questions. So yeah, you're stacking questions. Yeah, maybe multiple questions. But yeah, you want to ask one at a time. Bless you. I say use why questions sparingly because why gets into storytelling. Why gets into somebody's justification and so forth. So seldom do we need to know why somebody is saying something. It's not like you never ask, but that can end up kind of taking you down a rabbit hole. And then listening for metaphors, because the metaphors people use will tell you a little bit about how they think and how you can use metaphors back that they'll relate to. So this is all about listening. How do you give the feedback and ask questions? And then I call it the 8-second rule, which is when you ask a question, count to 8 before you say another thing, because you need to give people time to answer it. And sometimes some people think in a different way. Other people will just pop right out, other people not. So give them time.
I had a jump club member who was from another country. He's from the Middle East, and he was interviewing to somebody else from the Middle East, and he said, if you're in an interview in America and they ask you a question and you have to think about it, you have to tell them, let me think about that. Otherwise, they will assume that you don't have an answer and they'll just move on. So you have to always explain
that happens a lot
to Americans because they're so fast. They want to.
Well, and I would maintain that even some Americans would like you not to do that too. That they also need time to think. And by doing that, it's a sign of courtesy. You're not just peppering them, boom, 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 giving your answers. So it's just another way to kind of help the conversation along and hopefully get what you're looking for. Anybody else about any of that? Okay. I call them communication. Pardon me? Oh, it was to, after you ask a question, before you ask another one or say anything else, count to 8 so that you give it enough time. It's not just dead space, forever, but you're giving people time to respond. And if they haven't responded, you might say, was that clear? Do you have any questions about what I asked or what I said? So, communication guillotines. What a jerk. Instead, how about, wonder what's going on with her? Very different feeling there. Why does this always happen? This seems to happen a lot. What's going on? You see the difference in tone and how it might come across. You should, whatever. And what it would be like if you did that. So again, you're really getting to the same information, you're just finding easier, pleasant ways to ask. And why would you do that? How do you decide? Yes?
I used to work for this woman in a remote job, and I knew her tells pretty well, but when she didn't like something on a call, she would say it was fascinating.
I've heard that. Marvelous, that's marvelous. Yeah, well, there's a cue right there. There's a metaphor.
Bless your heart.
Yeah, bless your heart. So again, this is just a fun way to remind you that sometimes the things that we blurt out may be able to be said better, and you end up with a better outcome from the communication. Okay. Oh, I think I'm done. So how do we get better at communication? So we've talked about, the self-awareness aspect, building trust, and here it says trust and accountability, which are really closely related. Listening, really listening on all cylinders, as I think of it, and asking these relevant questions so you can get to this and feel like you have a pretty good idea that you're on the same page. So what else do I say? I think in the end we're all people. Everybody wants to be respected and heard and understood. So I think these coaching skills that we've just talked about, the ones in blue, are really positive ways to improve how you communicate, whether it's on a job interview. And of course, that's really important that you're listening and you're paying attention to what's going on in the room and the person and how they are, because, you know, maybe you don't want to work there. You know, if you're paying enough attention, you're going to get a lot of information about how it would be to be in that situation. So with that, let me see if I have any final point. My last point is to remember that people react to you based on how they feel about you. And how they feel about you will depend on how, I want to get my notes right. It depends on whether you see people as a person or as an object. And people can tell when you're just sliding past them and you're just thinking of you're the benefactor, you're the person that gives me what I need, rather than, you know, you look like you've had a hard afternoon. It's just shall we continue this conversation? So it's really being aware and courteous and showing that regard for other people and their time. And again, the only person you can change is you.
Do you, as a consultant, go into companies and help them establish this sort of more compassionate culture?
Well, yes, yeah. I recently did a facilitation project for a nonprofit. That it was a large nonprofit with not a huge team, but they were separated and they did several different things related, but the staff had different roles, and they weren't getting along. The boss was always upset, and they didn't know what they were supposed to do, and it was just really, so we got everybody together, and we started asking questions like, well, what do you love about your job? What do you not love about it? And that brought out and got us to this point about how are we communicating, and how the other people didn't understand. Like in one case, there was a young woman there who, when we were asking, what are the tough parts of your job, she said, the hardest thing, because this was in housing, low-income housing, she said, the hardest thing is when I have to tell people who are going into foreclosure that we cannot help them. And I asked her, well, how do you manage that? What do you do about that? And she said, I have a lot of faith. And in turn, I have a lot of faith, that's what she said. And, or I'm a very spiritual person. And that opened up the group. And they began to see each other like, oh, you're just not this person who does this. You're really, this is an important role that you have, and we want to support you. And so so that was just one example. Well, the point of it wasn't, let's make you all communicate better. Well, in a way it was, but it was really, let's ferret out what our issues are and how we can address them together as a team. And we did. Everybody got on the same page, and they were very happy, and they felt like they could now understood more about each other.
Now, do you also find that the personality, the temperament of the C-level people?
Oh, yeah.
So if they're a type A personality, which is one of the things that makes them be really successful as executives, but perhaps not very successful in their soft skills or whatever, that trickles down and creates a culture that lacks compassion and understanding.
Yes.
And so how do you deal with that?
Well, difficult if the C-level person isn't interested. But in the example I was telling you about this facilitation I did, the boss, who was described offline as a yeller, sat in the meetings in our facilitated sessions for the 2 days that we did it. And when people started telling us about their challenges, the room really changed. People said, they all just started looking at me saying, well, I think I'm empowered, but then I do it and my boss yells at me. And she's sitting right there. And so there was a little bit of that, and kind of at one point she got a little defensive, which you can imagine. But what helped. When she got defensive, she didn't yell. But what they did not understand is she was the person going out and borrowing huge, millions and millions of dollars to turn around and loan to low-income people, and this was the group that made those loans. So she was constantly scared, I think, you know, and not realizing, not having a connection with the team and not really understanding their commitment because it was spread out and, you know, she wasn't really communicating that well. So what was gratifying at the end of that session, she stood up and she said, I am just so amazed, you know, all this wonderful people, and I feel so much better, and I know we're working better together now. So it can happen like that, but she was brave. I mean, you know, she sat there and took it, and a lot of them won't. And really, I found in those kind of situations, it needs to be the kind of a one-on-one coaching situation. Usually it will come through somebody like their manager is saying, okay, we got a problem, you need coaching. Or maybe they just, it might be what the company offers. Sometimes they'll offer coaching to managers or C-level people to help them. Because it is a transition, because when you're managing, your job really is more and more about communication. It's about getting along with people. It's about it's about getting the best out of them, not just for you. So as a manager, you're really the, you know, I look at it as the servant. And of course, there's this thing about servant leadership, which a lot of them don't get, but some do. And I think, especially as coaching and what I was describing today, these kind of things come more and more to the fore, and more businesses realize the payoff they can get with better projects and spending less money, that it will become more and more the norm, that they expect their executives to be experts in communication and working with staff, and not so much experts in their field. You know, they can be great salespeople and great CFOs or whatever, but that doesn't translate into helping and dealing with people and getting the best from people. And I do believe everybody wants to do their best, you know, or they wouldn't be there.
Sometimes those people just need somebody between them and the rest of the people.
Well, yeah, or, you know, some kind of, yeah. So it's different for every company. Some, it's no big deal, like companies I used to work for, and it was so funny, it was so different, East Coast and West Coast. West Coast, it was all very egalitarian and, you know, very easy to work there and to deal with the organizational structure. Very different on the East Coast. It's a lot more hierarchical, a lot more, we don't mingle. So there's that kind of corporate culture too that can be in the way. But I go back to, you can only change yourself, you know, and when you change, you're changing the people, how they react to you. I'm sorry.
Marcia, I wanted to inquire what your summation is on meta skills to soft skills and the emotional intelligence aspect.
Yes.
And then I just wanted to pyramid on this amazing information that you're offering all of us. There's a book by Carrie Patterson, Crucial Conversation.
Oh, yes, yes.
Go ahead. What,
Crucial.
So, because I've been doing my research as you've been talking to us, and I'm obsessed with communication skills, so I'm kind of into this, but I looked up meta skills, and then I looked up soft skills, and I thought, I wonder what her synopsis is on.
I don't think there's much difference.
Okay, yeah.
I think meta skills, soft skills, people skills, communication skills are really about the same thing.
Yeah.
We're just emotional intelligence. You know, again, that's kind of trying to grade how well you're listening and communicating. Yes?
So I kind of wanted to leverage off of what she said as well. Would you mind going back to your 4 types of listening? So I wanted to provide some insight into something I got out of this that may help somebody else out. So as I sit in these presentations, I'm always constantly thinking, how can I rebrand myself? How can I answer those interview questions, those tough, challenging interview questions that are so hard to answer? And I'm always looking for the right answer, you know, the best answer. There's not a right, but always a great answer, right? And so, I'm not sure what that
Woo! Ignore the screen.
It's a ghost.
So as I saw that slide, I got to thinking, somebody asked earlier, how do I answer the question, or the question about, you know, one of my weaknesses. And one of the things that I like to do is kind of baffle an interviewer with information that they may not know about, so they don't necessarily know how to respond, but they think that, oh wow, this guy's really smart, really into it, really self-aware or whatever. So as I saw that slide, I got to thinking, wow, if I had that question, what is a weakness of yours? I could say, oh, I've been doing a lot of self-awareness, I've been doing a lot of study on communication styles and effective communication and listening, and according to whoever the guy was on that page, right? I read an article, you know, Dr. So-and-so, the 4 stages of listening, and my weakness is that I've moved through those stages, but I feel like I'm on stage 3, and name whatever that stage is, right? And I'm trying to move to stage 4, generative. And I'm working on that process of getting from 3 to 4, and I'm not quite there yet. Well, and then you have really somebody who's like listening to you, and they're like, they don't know the study, they don't know the person, but they're like, oh my gosh, this person really understands themselves. That's a great answer. Yeah, I don't know how to respond, but man, this person's got some self-awareness about them.
Yes, and well, it's, to me, all of these skills are practice. You know, they're lifelong learning in a way. You know, the more you do it, the more you learn about how your style is, how you perceive other people, and in turn, that, I think, can only enhance how you communicate.
Yeah, and then just to add to the other question about those people that aren't listening and all that, not everybody's a great listener, so you have to go into every meeting knowing that everybody's not a great listener. So being a better communicator, being more effective in communication can overcome some of those listening.
Right, because the communication is not just listening. It's not just telling. It's the both. It's to make sure you're all on the same page.